everyone. Welcome to the CXO Spice Talk. Today's topic is the modern CIO. Our special guest today is Sheri Rhodes, who is the Chief Customer Officer and the former CIO at Workday. Sheri, welcome to the CXO Spice Talk.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Helen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, last time we met was over 7 years ago when you were the global lead, application lead at Symantec. I remember Phil Fernandez and I went to meet you to learn what value you were looking for from a marketing automation solution like Marketo. So I'm delighted to finally reconnect with you, where I finally get reconnected with you after all these years.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you. I guess it's a small valley, like they say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into our discussion today, tell us a little more about yourself and your story as a technologist and what led you to become a chief customer officer at Workday.
Yeah, I would say it's one of those careers where there's a lot of horizontal movement to get a lot of experience. But I think, for this particular role, it's been super helpful. So I actually started my career, my first real job, right, in banking and in operations. And so I feel like it's really grounded in understanding kind of what the back office is like. But then it led me to other roles that were more certainly customer facing. And then eventually into technology, I don't know, over a couple of decades ago. And since then, it's been amazing, right, in terms of just being in the tech field and the technology industry. But having that background of how to listen to customers and having interacted firsthand with customer challenges, I think, sets up a really good foundation for this particular role that I'm in as Chief Customer Officer.
Absolutely. So you have been the technology leader most of your career. How has the CIO role evolved? What is the most effective way, in your opinion, for the CIO and Chief Customer Officer work together? And then what benefit have you seen, right, this evolution bring to the organization?
Yeah, I think it's, especially in the last 3 years, it's changed dramatically. I feel like for the CIO, they've had to adapt to so much change. I mean, we've all had to adapt, but I think that the CIOs they're the driving force of change in the organization. So, whether that's driving the digital agenda, which to me got more urgency during the pandemic, or learning how to work remotely, making sure we're all enabled with the right technology. And now we're pivoting back, right, in terms of coming back in the office and even more of those hybrid environments. Well, I know you kind of were asking, right, how has it changed? But then, kind of how, I guess, right, how the CIO and CCO work together, right, to enable that change. So I would answer that in a few ways. One, I think kind of if we lean into digital, that's a super important part for both the CIO and CCO. So if I look at my current role, the customer engagement and how that's changed in terms of what the customer is expecting from self-service, to different channels of communication, different learning patterns, all of that depends on the technology, and it's foundational. And even, we think about personalization in our own lives, right? But when we are at work too, I mean, we appreciate that personalization. So whether it be, through, kind of the customer experience or rather the employee experience, we want to make sure that we're being as effective with our time as possible. So I think that that's a good area of collaboration for the CIO and CCO. And then everything depends on data, and CIO is at the crux of kind of how the data flows through all of the ecosystem. And as you kind of pair up the customer journey with the data routes within the various systems, right, it's really important that linkage be there so that it becomes a true advantage from the data perspective and we can glean the right insights.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was actually reading an article about Workday earlier today. Right? It says you go through 1,800 deployment in 2021, and most of it was done remotely. I said, wow, and that's the scale we're talking about, right? So Now, as you taking this new role and interacting with customers more, I would, there's no doubt you'd interact with the CIO closely to ensure everything goes smoothly, working with your customers and then taking care of your teams as well.
That's right. I mean, just to emphasize that, it's almost 1.5 solution deployments per day across our customer base. So it keeps us busy, but it's pretty exciting from that perspective.
Yeah, what's your opinion on the benefit this brings, the evolution brings to the organization?
Yeah, I think the evolution is super important in terms of that relationship because, whether we're looking at how the business collaborates with each other to make the customer experience better. So the tech stack, the intersection points, right? How we look at how the data flows through the journey. That's, one area, but even the voice of the customer, like a good example, we use, of course, listening tools to make sure that we're really understanding the sentiment of our customer. So through that natural language processing, right, and the sentiment analysis, we're able to hopefully get early warning signals, right, if there's any risk in terms of customers not being satisfied. And we want to see that at all levels. So whether it's using our tool sets, right, or using kind of the platforms that sit outside of our core product, we want to make sure that we're being responsive from a customer standpoint.
Okay. And, when we talk about the modern CIO, there's so much to unpack. So let's talk about business outcomes, right? Could you give an example? You give the course example earlier, but could you give another example where the modern CIO is making impact within the customer organizations?
Yeah, and so I guess I can give kind of the most recent example of when I was the CIO. I actually kind of was co-sponsors with the CCO who had a role previously, but it was all around kind of digital engagement and how do we improve a few different areas. So one, we looked at the data foundation to make sure that we were looking across our product, customer, kind of all of the master data elements that you would think about, that we had accuracy, single points of truth, right? And how that data hygiene works on a continuous basis. So that when we were working on kind of our online community, which is how our customers interact for knowledge, information, or even to create a support ticket, we wanted to make sure that that was a single front door, right? That the data led to a fast, effective interaction with the customer so that they could get the information at their fingertips. So that meant refreshing the search capability that we had within the online tool, as well as kind of changing the number of front doors that they could come through, as well as just making sure that overall experience was, relevant and meaningful for the customer for every interaction.
I like what you said at the front door, right? That's a very vivid description of, as a CIO, how the data comes in and where that flows. Being a chief customer officer myself, working with multiple organizations, one question I was being asked very often, right? What if the chief customer officer in an organization, he or she does not report to the CEO? How do you make sure your voice being heard at a higher level?
Yeah, I hear that question too sometimes. But, I think a seat at the table, you can get that automatically without reporting to the CEO. Whether it's the CIO, CCO, I mean, if you're thinking of your business like a general manager and thinking about it holistically end to end and kind of all of the interaction points, it's going to be important that that voice be heard at the table, because if the CIO, for example, is working across all of those stakeholder communities at the C level, it's going to be important in terms of how they're advancing the technology to drive business outcomes, introduce new business models. We see it a lot in the mergers and acquisition space in terms of how rapid, right, we can bring those product sets together. So to me, it's constant. And if you think of kind of the value that you can bring to the table from kind of an overall management perspective, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I love that, right? If you add value, your voice will be heard no matter who you report to. I really love that mindset.
Yeah. And I think that even the issues today, right, are really bringing that to the forefront too. So when you think about, security, ESG, customer data, business continuity, I mean, those things are all front and center and certainly have been as we kind of moved out of the pandemic.
Absolutely. As much as technology helps people become more efficient, it also creates greater complexity, especially when it comes to an organization's tech stack. So how do you ensure the tech stack leads to better customer and employee experience? How does the CIO take that customer first approach without increasing internal complexity?
Mm-hmm. Always the challenge. There's always going to be more demand and capacity to deliver, and probably both from a tech and a resource perspective. But to me, it starts with how the work's delivered. So as a CIO, I think it's important for, to set up in product teams so that you have that more agile approach to delivery, can be more responsive. And if we look back at the digital customer engagement example that I gave, the chief customer officer provided the product leadership, right? So the product ownership, and then the CIO provided all of the delivery aspects. So it's a good, being steeped in business context and understanding kind of how that life cycle and that journey works. And with a product-driven organization, it's not that traditional waterfall method. So things move more quickly, right? You have an ability to adapt to change. Business models change, right? Things come up that you don't want to be inflexible. So that's, to me, at least one of the ways. And then, you combine that with making sure that the customers are part of, your proof cycle, I guess I would say, to make sure that it's hitting the mark in terms of resonating, it's answering the key concerns and problem statements that they would think of or have. So making sure that they're part of the end-to-end delivery cycle is really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love what you just said, right? Earlier, you talk about not only the life cycle, there's a proof cycle, leveraging customers being the proof cycle. There's a combination of agile and waterfall approach. That's why, kudos, right? That's why Workday is super successful today. So I would love to talk to you more about it in another day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually watched your interview. You've done a lot of interviews, but one of them you talk about taking less of a reactive management approach and have really constant awareness of what's taking place on the project being completed. So now with the chief customer officer role, what advice would you give to the modern CIOs to take more ownership of this approach?
Sure. I think it first starts with mindset. We talk about that pretty often in terms of, being accountable, wanting ownership. But the first kind of probably building block is to set up the right sponsorship and governance in any key program. So the most successful deployments that we see, even from a Workday perspective, is where we have good sponsorship, good governance of the program, right? It's basically a forcing function to make sure it's a priority across the organization for the success of the deployments. So, and then the team can, execute that versus being reactive, and having all the right kind of early warning signs as well. So the signals that potentially a deployment or, is going to go south, and trying to help mitigate those in advance. And that gives the right level of visibility to the sponsor.
You're right on. The sponsorship and governance are super critical. They pretty much go in tandem. Let's have some fun, right? The second
exactly.
time usually is a fun time. So I actually published a blog just this morning. It talked about 3 strategies for the CIOs to win the great tech stack battle. What I like to do, I like to name the 3 strategies, right, one by one, and then you read that each strategy on the scale of 1 to 5, and as to how important you feel it is and why, and explain to the audience why. Okay. You ready?
And 5 being most important, or just
5 being the most important? Yes.
Okay.
So strategy number 1, evaluating the tech stack. Consider the expanded leadership role of the CIO.
Well, having been a CIO, I would say that's very important. That's absolutely a 5.
Okay.
You want to make sure that the ecosystem connects and seams together well. And so, having a one-off technology that's not going to fit within the broader set of systems and solutions would be tough. And so, making sure that the CIO is involved, there's always opportunity for simplification, right? Streamlining. So that should definitely be taken into consideration.
Okay. Strategy number 2, move decisively in the short term, but play the long game.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of my mantras, being decisive. And it's okay, right? I mean, you have to evaluate kind of where you can take risks and where you can't. As long as I would say it's very important of 5, but just not just to make a decision to make a decision. So the right level of either experimentation or the right data sets should enable that quick decisioning. And so to me, it's definitely very important from that perspective. As long as you have all those things, it's a 5.
Okay. Strategy number 3, consider embedded intelligence to improve decision intelligence. This is a little tricky when you read this, and I'd love for you to explain to the audience what that means, because not everybody understands what that means.
Yeah, so to me, it's about, not thinking about building kind of the whole AI thinking, right, as an afterthought. You need to build that into your tooling. You need to build that into your technology so that the data insights that will come out of that, right, would be natural versus an oversight. So I think it's extremely important. That also would be a 5, because you need to think about it at the beginning of the building blocks when you're bringing in a new system, because having those right insights can drive continuous improvement. They're going to drive continuous customer satisfaction. So it shouldn't be missed. It shouldn't be an afterthought.
Yeah. So Sheri, give me an example about embedded intelligence and then how Workday helped customers to improve decision intelligence leveraging the solution.
Yeah, great question. I feel lucky because our product builds that intelligence in at every step of the way. So it's not an afterthought, and we think about it all the time. So if you look at our Fin platform, which is for the CFO and finance community in terms of, obviously managing all their financial aspects, we have the journal entries, right, and processing journal entries and exceptions is often a manual process in any other world. But we've built kind of that automated intelligence into the tooling, whether it be accounting center with the use of Prism to kind of do that anomaly detection automatically. And so it's really very, very rare, right, that you're going to have manual exceptions that have to be looked at.
Yeah, I actually learned that from Philippa during my last CXO session.
Yeah,
and
she's very passionate about that.
I know, I was quite impressed with your 0-day month-end close process. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Sheri. I'm glad I hit the mark with you ranking all 3 strategies being 5. So it's wonderful to hear that. Well, we have a couple more questions, right? The next one is, what is the role of CIO in creating excellent customer experience? You kind of alluded that earlier during our earlier conversation, but I'd like us to bring that all back again to, just to talk about that. And do you have a success story you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I think, it comes back to the example I gave around the digital customer engagement. Any interaction point with the customer where, they're getting insights, they're seeking information, right? They're seeking recommendations. And we can use kind of that intelligence and that automation that you referenced earlier. That is what becomes super critical, because then we're actually kind of bridging all of those things together. So the example I gave about the digital customer engagement program, where data was a foundation in terms of making sure you have the right hygiene, the right oversight, right? You're connecting the dots on that data. It becomes a true advantage in terms of understanding the customer life cycle, being able to predict customer health, predictive measures. You can look at things in terms of adoption, what we're hearing and listening to on survey things. So I think data probably was a huge component of that particular example. And it becomes an advantage from a CCO perspective, because the more we hear from our customers, the more we can shape kind of the future of what that interaction needs to be and how we can improve our products.
Absolutely. Here it comes to my last question. Could you use 3 words to describe a modern CIO?
3 words. I'm going to use hyphens and maybe my first word, Helen. And then it'll only count as 1, right? So I would say connecting the dots, hugely important. And that can take a lot of forms. That's like, patterns where they don't exist, but it could be bridging stakeholders, right? To me, that's so critical for the CIO. Being decisive, which you called out, I think that's important. We can't, we have to be thoughtful, and we're constant risk takers in the CIO space. So I think being decisive is hugely important. And then resourceful. Okay. I'm always, I think innovation, creativity is hugely important, but also be resourceful in some of the, experiments or innovations that have been done in the past, right? How can you build on those to make them even better?
I love that. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, Sheri. And here's my biggest takeaway from our conversation today, right? The CIO's role has evolved into much more than an overseer of tech tools and services these days. The modern CIO plays a key leadership role in critical strategic technical management initiatives, from information security and algorithm to customer experience, and leveraging data to mitigate risk and drive business growth. Right? In your own word, the modern CIO, they're really good at connecting dots. They are decisive, they're a risk taker. And in my words, right, they got to be strategic and always prepared, and they have to be very articulate. And they're, really courageous and inspiring leaders with foresight into the future. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and then stay hungry, stay bold, and stay grateful.